Elon Musk just killed Twitter. Now, since his takeover, there have been some changes on the platform that maybe let people know there was something that was coming down the pipeline. Feature changes, paid verification, and Twitter viewing limits all came as a bit of a shock to the platform and sent a storm across the Twitterverse. As an aside, is that now the Xverse, or does that clash with something Marvel's doing with X-Men? I doubt that was even considered when the name was changed. But that aside, these changes started to cause ripples of discontent on the platform. Oftentimes they were dropped without warning, and they caused a little bit of confusion amongst users who suddenly found themselves having to deal with these changes without realizing what was going to happen or how they impacted them. This should have been the proverbial canary down the mine for Twitter's new owner, but in a lot of cases he didn't really understand the discontent and actually sometimes just switched them back. So you'd have a feature come in and then it'd be switched back, or it'd be slightly modified because of discontent that came out, and rather than that being done behind closed doors, it was done actually on a live platform in a real environment with real users just getting angrier, more confused and upset about these changes in the first place. This was also an example of things to come, with rushed decisions, no plan in place, lack of communication, and more of a reaction than a plan to roll things out. This all culminated when we woke up one morning to see that the Twitter sign had been removed from Twitter HQ, and instead in its place a giant X had been projected on the side of the building. This came completely out of the blue. See what I did there? And it was unexpected from everybody. There was no communication, there was nothing in place to let us know this was going to happen. It was really just wake up and suddenly Twitter had gone and this new brand was in its place. The whole thing felt rushed, reactionary, and somewhat forced. Plus, I doubt Batman was even asked before his projector was taken. So why was this such a bad example of rebranding? Well, I'm going to go over the main reasons why you shouldn't try and replicate this for your business. There was no plan. As a brand owner, your brand lives in an ecosystem, and that ecosystem includes your audience or customers, your employees, the market as a whole, and the wider public discourse. Each of these groups in this ecosystem have an association with your brand, and that is based on memories, feelings, thoughts, interactions across many years through multiple touch points that have tied their associations to your brand. When you are doing a rebranding project, you have a duty of care to those groups, that ecosystem that you have spent time, money, energy and effort cultivating and building up. And actually you provide a role in their life that is something that is important to them, whether you realize it or not, and whether you realize the impact of your brand on those people's lives. It is something that they are attached to in whatever guise that is, whatever role you fulfill as a brand. You are part of their life and you are seen as part of their life. You're familiar, you're something they go back to time and time again. So any type of rebrand you are thinking of, any type of change you are thinking of, you need to consider these groups, this ecosystem, the associations they have with your brand that they've built up, and what a change could do to them in terms of impact. This is why a plan is so important, because if you don't have a plan, you can't understand the job you are going to do with regards to helping manage the expectations and the associations that your audience and these groups and this ecosystem has built up with this brand, and how you're going to move them from the old brand to the new brand. How can you bring them along with you? Now with this X rebrand, there was none of that. It was almost the equivalent of ripping a plaster off. Take the band-aid off, do it quickly, get it done. The problem with this is you've just severed all those associations your audience, the groups and the ecosystems had with your brand in the first place. You cut the ties at the source. Something that's even more important in a complete overhaul rebrand like this is that you need to somehow connect the dots between the previous brand and the new brand. There needs to be a through line between the two, and you need to explain the change in a way that your audience understands from a positive perspective as to why this happened. And without an effective rollout strategy, you are literally in a position to just alienate, annoy, and frustrate those groups, that ecosystem, whether that is your audience, your customers, your employees, your partners, or the wider market. There was no communication. When it comes to rebranding, all change needs to be explained. You need to communicate why you're rebranding, what is the reason for it, how does this change the associations your ecosystem that you has with the brand that they've had for many years. Why are you changing? How does it affect them? What are they going to become in the new guise with the new brand? What are the new features? What are the new things that are coming as part of this brand, this rebrand? And how does it affect the day-to-day users? How does it affect the culture of the company from the employee's perspective? How does it affect the partners and advertisers and sponsors and the people you work with? All these things have been built up over many, many years, and you owe it to them as a duty of care to communicate to them why you are rebranding, what is the reason for the rebrand, what are you hoping to achieve, and how do they fit into this story? If you can create a perfect vision of where you're heading, and you can tell these groups why they are on the journey with you, why you want them to be on the journey with you, why you want them to buy into this new brand, you can build a really strong connection as part of a transformation. They've gone over a threshold with you into this new brand from the previous one. If you can get that right, you can create a bond that is really, really strong. In this example, there was none of that. There was no communication. Nobody was taken from point A to point B as part of a transformation. Nothing was communicated in any meaningful way to explain what this brand is. What is it for? Where is it heading? And how do the users and everybody else involved go along with it? Are they still wanted? Are they still part of it? Do these people even matter? I don't think from their perspective they do. They don't care. They have an idea and they're running with it. And I think that's what it felt like for a lot of people. But you could have put some communication around it that would have actually helped people transition from the previous brand to this new brand in a seamless way. This lack of communication also made it feel like this was more reactionary than it probably was. Now, Elon Musk had talked about this change for a while. He talked about it a year previously, which is even more worrying because there'd been a year in place since the first time he'd mentioned it, and that probably wasn't the first time he thought about it, because the term X he's used in a number of places, from a model of a Tesla to a name of a previous company to one of his children's names. So he's had the idea for X and what it means to him, SpaceX, all these different things. He's had this idea for a long time, but there's been never any communication about it, about what was going to happen with it. And that doesn't mean you have to reveal secrets or anything like that. You can drip feed an idea that something's going to happen, something's going to change over time. And then you can do the rebrand, and then you can explain the rebrand and communicate it in a way that you need to when you're ready to do that. And this wasn't handled in that way, and so it felt rushed, forced, and reactionary, as opposed to something that potentially had been in the works for a while. There was no care with this rebrand. So your brand has built up those associations for many years with that ecosystem, and for them, you serve as something that's part of their life. They have a role with your brand, an interaction with it. They feel familiar to that brand. And we all have these brands. We have these brands that we go back to time and time again, we're familiar with, we feel comfortable with. A great example of this is when the Royal Mail decided to rebrand. So the Royal Mail in the UK decided to rebrand to Consignia. And they changed the brand name that had been around since the late 1800s in the UK. And it had gone through world wars. This brand had been a staple of the UK community population for generations, and something that's that ingrained into people. And then they just changed it. They changed the name, they changed the logo, and went on a new direction. And immediately it severed the connection between this brand that had meant so much to so many people through so many generations, something that kids who went away during the war and were taken off to the countryside, so they're away from the cities that were being bombed. Brands like the Royal Mail were always going to be there with them. One of the consistent things they had in their life through that time was some of the institutions and the brands and the things that were there through those processes. And then to just change that out of the blue without any warning, any reason, causes so much confusion, alienates the audience, severs that association you have with the brand, and makes you wonder whether or not you are valued in the first place as part of that ecosystem that they worked so hard to build up. It's why Royal Mail switched back pretty quickly, because it just didn't work. And in this case, there was little to no care about anybody who was using Twitter, was on Twitter, was using the platform. There was little to no care about the employees that were being pulled along with it, or the people previously that had worked hard and put time and effort into building the Twitter brand. Whether you like that or not, it was a brand that had built up associations with many people, and you can't just cut the cord, that's it, done, because so many people have so many emotional attachments to this brand. For good or for worse, you are just severing that cord, and it never makes anybody feel valued. There was no committee, or at least it didn't seem like there was a committee. So most of the time, when you go through a rebranding process, it's a process where you have a group of people, whether that's particular stakeholders, whether that's a consultant or a strategist, an agency, you have a few different people in there that create a committee of some sorts. And it's the job of that committee to understand and clarify and develop the new direction for this brand together. You brainstorm, you knock ideas off each other. You're also strong enough in some examples, in some cases, to challenge certain ideas that potentially are not as good as they could be, or are maybe quite egotistical, or don't really serve the audience or the greater good in this situation. Sometimes you have to go, that's a good starting point. Where can we take this next? How can we develop this? If we're going to use this idea, what are we going to do with it? How does that fit into the wider narrative? How does that connect to the previous brand? How are we going to bring the audience along with us so that they can be part of this journey too? And I don't feel like there was any of that done in this. It doesn't feel that it was much of a committee. Now, I might be wrong, but as I said previously, Elon's had a real fascination with the idea of this word X, or this term X, or this brand X, or X used in multiple different places, and what that means to him. And that's fantastic. And if he could communicate what X meant to him and why that is so cool, why is that so important, why is that so different, what does it mean, what's the future vision, what is his overall goal with the idea of this brand, maybe all of us could buy into that, but it didn't feel like that was the case. And it didn't feel like he obviously used a lot of advisors in this example. Now, maybe he did, and maybe he didn't listen to them, but it feels quite an insular rebrand from the outside. And that might just be due to the lack of communication. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was months and years and planning and lots of strategy and all this kind of thing, but it doesn't feel like it from a strategist perspective to the looking in, with the lack of communication, the lack of planning and the lack of care. It feels like this was something that was quite an insular rebrand. It was done with maybe one person's guidance, maybe a couple at max, but it doesn't feel like there was a committee involved. And whether there was or there wasn't isn't the point, but it doesn't feel like it, and that is the point. It doesn't feel like anybody else had a say in this other than the person that was driving it forward. Now, Elon Musk is a visionary. He really is. And with things like Tesla, one of the things that I've talked about on a previous video about Tesla is, if you asked anybody on the planet what the vision for Tesla was, they wouldn't be able to tell you the exact words used in the vision statement, but they would be able to get pretty close. And that's because that brand is able to communicate what their vision is, where they are going, what they are trying to achieve, and how you are part of that. So transforming the world's transition to sustainability. It's something like that is the vision statement. I can't quite remember exactly what it is, but essentially you know that's where they're going. Everything they do breathes it. That's what they do. With this though, I think because of that, he's always done stuff that's been very visionary. So if I asked them what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, that famous Ford quote, which is great. That's important. You need innovators, you need people that can see things ahead of time. But I tell you what, if you could communicate what that ahead of time looked like for the people that are involved in it, you'd get such buy-in. You'd get a massive amount of engagement. You get people following you and starting to be part of a movement potentially to where you're heading them. And I think that's where he's going. I think what he's trying to do is create something that is different from where we have now when it comes to social media. And I believe that's where he's trying to take us, but he just hasn't told anybody. So it's like you're getting on a train and you don't know where that's going to end up. And that is the saddest thing about this rebrand, because I believe there is a way that there is a story and a narrative here that could have been communicated that would have given this brand a real lease of life and got people excited about it, and actually made Mr. Musk the usher in of a new social media revolution. And I think he's missed the trick. Now, it's no secret that Elon Musk was not a fan of Twitter when he purchased it. And he obviously had great visions for how he was going to change it and the things he could do to make it a better platform in his eyes. If they had communicated that the current social media landscape was the problem or the villain of this story, using phrases like social media needs a reboot or social media is no longer for the people, and then outlined all the problems with it, for example, trolls, bots, content creators not being paid what they're worth while they're elevating these companies to make billions, as well as privacy issues and lots of issues with regards to verification and all these different things. If you could have outlined the problems as well, so you outline the main problem, the main villain, the social media is dead, social media needs a reboot, the social media landscape is no longer for the people, and then you start talking about the problems, those things that cause that build that up. It's no longer about social media anymore. How can you connect through this platform? You know, content creators aren't being paid enough, that kind of thing. You start to create a gap. And the gap is, okay, well, if this is the problem, if this is the current situation, what we need is we need a new way of doing things. We need a new panacea. We need somewhere we can get to that is not like this. We need a new platform that's going to be for us, the people that, you know, we want to still commune with each other. We want to be able to get paid what we deserve as content creators. We want to have proper verification processes. We want to have decent privacy. This starts to create an us versus them against the established market industry of social media. So the us needs a new champion. They need a new hero. They need someone who's going to usher in a revolution. You can then introduce X as the promised land for social media, a place where you're taking people into the future with the best way to move forward, as a platform that is for the user, not using the user. And if you then start to tie the dots with that and bring the best parts of the previous brand into the new brand and communicate what you're doing with that, so what you're keeping and why you're keeping it, and the good points about the old brand, but also the things that didn't work with it, then you start to help people to move to this new place a lot easier. You can then start using imagery and symbolism to communicate things. So for example, let's look at Harley Davidson. Harley Davidson wants to communicate rebellion, liberation, freedom, community. They do that by having shots of open roads, shots of people riding together. They have things like wings on their symbols. All of these things are cues and symbols and iconography to communicate what they want to communicate. Now, I think a really good way to communicate this rebrand would have been through the idea of a phoenix. You've got a bird in Twitter, and rising from the ashes is X. And Phoenix has even got an X in it, so you could utilize that. But essentially, the idea of rebirth could have been utilized in this rebrand from a visual, from a symbolism point of view, to get across the idea that this isn't about scrapping the old and bringing in the new. It's a continuation. It's just a rebirth. It's an evolution. It's a new point in time. This is the future. This is where we're heading, and we want you to be with us on it. Not only would this engage the audience that you already have, imagine how engaged your employees are going to be when they feel like they are ushering in the proper way social media should be done. There's a really good purpose in that. You know, social media should be available to all. Social media should be something that is safe for all, maybe, could be a purpose. There could be lots of things you wrap up into that engage your internal team and build a culture around, and the values that you have. Maybe some of the values are things like honesty, authenticity, you know, the ability to challenge, things like this that could be built into the fabric of the company, so that internally you're helping those move as well. There's a change process going on internally. So if you communicate it better and you build it in, this is what you can do, and this is the power that a rebrand has. If you do it properly, not only can you transform your business from an external perspective, how you look, how you're coming across, how you're positioned to capture a new audience or a new market, but you engage your old audience. You make them feel engaged and part of this journey. And at the same time, you are motivating your workforce and they feel proud to be part of this brand and represent it on a day-to-day basis. So key takeaways when rebranding your business that you could have learned from this particular rebranding failure: always have a plan about how you're going to roll out the brand both internally and externally, and the impact it's going to have on the wider ecosystem. Make sure you know how you're going to communicate this rebrand. It needs to make sense with your audience, it needs to make sense with your employees, it needs to make sense with the wider market. You need to have a communications plan. You need to understand the narrative that you're trying to talk about and how you're going to let people know why you're doing this rebrand, where you're taking them and what the future looks like for them. Why should they come on this journey with you? If you do the first two things, then this next point becomes easier. So show that you care. You want these people to feel valued. They've spent time, money, energy investing in your brand. If you treat them now like they don't matter, then all of that has been built up is going to be for nothing. And you're going to leave a lot of them feeling alienated and like, why did they even bother in the first place? And always work with others in the process of developing your brand. You can't create a brand in a vacuum. You need to have other people as part of the process. Bounce ideas off, try new things, test stuff out. Make sure you know what you're doing before you do it. But don't be single-minded in what you're trying to achieve. Be open-minded to other ideas. You do not have to listen to them, but it's good to be open-minded to what other people think, because sometimes having those voices around you helps you from making big mistakes. So now you know how to effectively rebrand, unlike in this case. Have you ever considered what is holding your brand back currently? So where are you strong? Where are you weak? What areas of your brand are currently holding you back? Well, if you're interested, we have a 4-minute brand power assessment. It will take you through a number of questions and it will give you a report at the end, a customized report for your brand that will tell you where you're strong, where you're weak, and how you can improve. And a link for that is in the description below. If you've enjoyed this video, I would highly recommend watching our rebranding failures video. There's a collection of some really interesting rebranding failures on there, and you can check that out. The link will be somewhere on the screen above.